What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, and today, hitting you guys with another OTA practice report / update based on what we're reading and the information that's being given to us from the New York Giants and other sources. And today, I kind of want to focus in on the trenches. Now, that's a little bit difficult to do, and I'll preface this conversation by saying OTAs are non-padded practices. They are non-contact practices, right? There's no hitting, so evaluating the trench players is a little bit difficult. However, there are still some key takeaways you can have, and I do have those for you guys, and I'm going to go ahead and share them. We're going to talk about Darius Alexander as well, a player who the New York Giants, of course, drafted number 65 overall, defensive tackle out of Toledo. He signed his rookie contract yesterday, so I figured it was fitting to spend some time in this episode and just discuss him, the impact that he could make, and this position battle that he's about to find himself in for a potential starting job on the Giants' interior defensive line as a rookie. So that's going to be the main topic of conversation. Like I said, OTA practice report and update, and then a little bit of a discussion about why I think Darius Alexander is going to be an absolute beast for the New York Giants. But first and foremost, want to just go through some of the highlights of OTAs over the last couple of days based on the practice reports that we've received. So what I've read is that Russell Wilson is definitely making his presence known. He's hitting a bunch of those patented moon balls, is how they keep referring to them in the Giants practice reports. Several of them going deep and a couple of them going to Jalen Hyatt. Now, Jalen Hyatt's really been performing well according to all accounts here. As I've mentioned in a recent practice update, Malik Neighbors is not practicing. The Giants are keeping him bubble wrapped because he's still dealing with a lingering toe issue that apparently he's been dealing with since college. So it's not really something of great concern. The Giants don't expect him to have any procedure. They don't expect him to miss any significant time with this injury. This is just because OTAs are just unpadded practices. They're not all that significant. And there's a lot of time between now and the start of the preseason, not even mentioning how far there is until the regular season. So the Giants are just being careful, being smart with Malik Neighbors. And as a result, he's not on the practice field. Well, who's stepping up in his absence, playing with the starters? None other than Jalen Hyatt, which I think is a really good sign. Giants fans, as we all know, we've been waiting for a Jalen Hyatt breakout. Will we get it this season? I'm not going to put too much stock into OTAs, but I'll say this is an encouraging first step towards a potential breakout. And I do think it's important to note that the Giants view Jalen Hyatt as the primary backup receiver. Malik Neighbors out of the lineup. Who gets the nod? Jalen Hyatt does. And so far, he's been rising to the occasion. He's caught several touchdown passes, including a 40-plus yard gain for a touchdown from Russell Wilson in practice on Monday. So we're getting a whole lot. Jalen Hyatt has been making a lot of plays, and I think that's exciting stuff. You know, Russell Wilson, when he signed with the New York Giants and did his introductory press conference, one of the players that he specifically mentioned by name was Jalen Hyatt. He said that he's a player he feels has a lot of, quote, untapped potential, end quote. So Russell Wilson, higher on Hyatt than most Giants fans seem to be, and I'm going to trust Russell Wilson's evaluation and hope that him and his deep passing accuracy can get the most out of Jalen Hyatt this season. So there's the mini update. We've talked about Hyatt a lot, though, so won't spend any more time on him. Moving on to the next quarterback that I want to mention, and that is Jackson Dart, who, by all accounts, has been a standout performer through the first week and a half of OTAs. The practice report on Monday indicated that he made a few plays on the run, getting out of the pocket, flushed from pressure, and making some throws across his body, which I do think is a pretty interesting thing for the practice report to note. One of them went to Amir Smith-Marset, who, of course, is a wide receiver, but mainly a return specialist for the New York Giants that they acquired last season. And then the other one went to Lil Jordan Humphrey, one of the Giants' backup receivers. So that does indicate if those are the targets he's throwing to, those are plays being made probably with the third team. He is the third stringer, of course, behind Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston right now, although that's obviously got plenty of room for improvement for Dart. He can move up the depth chart for sure this season, but making some plays, making some throws on the run, and I thought that was another encouraging note from the practice report. He also hit Thomas Fidone II on a couple of big completions, according to the report. And Fidone has reportedly flashed his athleticism and hands throughout OTAs. So I think those are also exciting notes because Thomas Fidone, if you guys tuned into yesterday's episode where we discussed Theo Johnson primarily, on top of Theo Johnson being part of that discussion, we did include 7th-round draft pick out of Nebraska, Thomas Fidone. And that was before I had really dug even deeper into these practice reports and found quite a few mentions of Thomas Fidone. So he has been a standout performer at these OTAs. And everybody is reporting that he's flashing a lot of athleticism and some sure hands. So I think that's also a positive sign, especially when hearing that it's Jackson Dart connecting with a fellow rookie of his, draft classmate of his in Thomas Fidone. So that's the update on a couple of the skill position players and the 2 quarterbacks that I wanted to mention. But I do want to move over to the defensive side of the ball and talk about some of these players in the trenches. Once again, it is a non-padded practice, but they do simulate a pass rush. I just mentioned Jackson Dart was making some plays out of the pocket, flushed from pressure. Yes, there is pressure. They cannot tackle the quarterback. They're not going to touch the quarterback at all, but they do simulate pressure. And a few players were in the backfield quite a few times in the last couple of practices, according to the practice reports. Those players being undrafted rookie free agent Trace Ford, Elijah Chapman, the UDFA from last year, who came on as a pretty solid contributor. Brian Burns had a sack. Again, they don't tackle the quarterback, but considered a sack, whistle blown on that play. Brian Burns had one, and so did rookie Abdul Carter, who the Giants selected number 3 overall. So we do have some reports on the guys getting in the backfield. And the one that I want to circle out of those 4 names that I just mentioned is Elijah Chapman, because not only did Elijah Chapman reportedly have a sack in the OTA practice yesterday, but he also batted down a pass at the line of scrimmage. So the 6-foot, 278-pound interior defensive lineman is active, making some plays at OTAs, and I think that's exciting to see. It was really around this time last year in OTAs and then moving on into training camp where Elijah Chapman started to make a name for himself. And eventually Chapman made the 53-man roster and eventually made his way into the lineup for quite a few of those games last season. So I'm excited about him. I like Elijah Chapman. I think he is undersized, and I think that does hold him back in his ability to stop the run. But as a rotational interior pass rusher, I do really like the potential of Elijah Chapman. And I view him as a player who, as he continues to progress in his NFL career, continues to develop in this interior defensive line room that, frankly, I think still needs to add more depth. Well, they might not if Elijah Chapman continues to develop. So maybe he adds some weight, some strength, becomes a little bit of a better run defender, and then continues to be a quality rotational pass rusher. I could see a future where Elijah Chapman really does stick around here with the New York Giants for quite some time. So as he enters the second season of his career, definitely a player that I'm keeping an eye on, but really keeping an eye as best as I can on all of these guys in the trenches. On the offensive side of the ball for the trenches, haven't heard much, haven't read much either. Didn't see a whole lot about the offensive linemen. As we all know, Evan Neal is working in at guard. We'll get a better look at him during training camp when he's actually able to put the pads on and try and, pass protect against Dexter Lawrence and the rest of them. That will be really fun to watch, or maybe tragic to watch. We'll see. But Evan Neal working in at guard, Josh Azidu working in at tackle, Marcus Bowe working in a little bit of both, according to these reports. And that's really all I have for you on the offensive line side of things in the trenches. But like I said, for the defensive line, I've read that Abdul Carter has definitely been active. He's been getting in the backfield, which is encouraging. Not surprising, though. Number 3 overall pick. Probably the best defensive player in that draft class. For my money, he was, and for that of most people, an absolute superstar and in the making, a stud, as we all know him. So Abdul Carter making plays, Brian Burns making plays. Haven't read much about Kayvon Thibodeau, but again, guys, don't put a ton of stock into it. The same way that I'm going to tell you to hold your horses on overreacting to the positives, also hold your horses on overreacting to any non-positives. I wouldn't even call this a negative. I would call this a neutral with Kayvon Thibodeau not being featured in the practice reports. It's okay. Again, when we get to training camp, maybe then we could start to have some worries if he hasn't made a single play then. But I'm sure he has made plays. There's only so much that could fit in these practice reports anyway, but once again, as I mentioned, a couple of defensive linemen getting in the backfield for would-be sacks. Brian Burns, Abdul Carter also getting back there. So that's really the full report on the trenches. One last note that I want to bring up before we move on to our Darius Alexander conversation is Dane Belton. Dane Belton, we've discussed him quite a bit throughout OTAs. If you saw my week 1 OTAs practice report that I posted, I believe that was on Saturday. So a few days ago, we discussed how throughout the first week of practice, Dane Belton really stood out. I mean, Belton was making plays all last week, had some interceptions and some pass breakups. Well, I have a positive report to update you on that. His strong play has continued into this week. Remember, I mentioned that Elijah Chapman potential sack. Or Abdul Carter's potential sack, actually. I have the note right here. Remember, I mentioned Abdul Carter had a sack at practice. Well, because in the OTAs, they don't blow the play dead when the would-be sack happens. The play goes on. On that play, the quarterback threw the ball. They don't mention who the quarterback was. So don't comment down below, oh, who are all these interceptions being thrown by? It doesn't mention in the practice report. The Giants are smart. They do that to protect their players, whatever. On Abdul Carter's potential sack, the play kept going. Dane Belton ended up grabbing an interception, taking it all the way home for a touchdown. He also had another pass breakup later on in the practice on Monday, of course. That makes 2 pick sixes for him through three OTA practices. 2 pick sixes, 3 practices, and I think 2 pass breakups as well. So the kid is stuffing the stat sheet. So continue to keep an eye on Dane Belton. I will continue to update you on Dane Belton because, as I said, heading into OTAs, I said to keep an eye on Belton. And as we are going through OTAs, I'm feeling really good about that call and really enjoying all of the reports that I've seen on Belton and how strong his performance has been. Really looking forward to him when we do get to OTAs at the end of July. So moving on from Belton, and actually the last note, Tyler Nubin also did have an interception. So if you're starting to say, oh, if Nubin doesn't start to stand out, can Belton take his job? Very unlikely. Nubin has also been playing well. He had a pass breakup that was basically an interception. He just dropped it in the first practice last week, and he had an interception in yesterday's practice. So some good reports. The defensive backs have been showing up to play, but at the same time, the quarterbacks and receivers have made some plays as well. So it's been a bit of a give and take so far through OTAs, and that's kind of how it usually goes because it's 7-on-7s, 11-on-11 drills. It's very much just simulated, non-padded football, and it's about the routes and about the coverage abilities. So you'll hear a lot about the defensive backs, the receivers, not a lot about the trenches, but like I said, I was sifting through the practice reports, had to find what I could about the trenches and share that info with you guys. So that's what I wanted to focus on in this episode, and hopefully I achieved that goal. But moving on to the second topic of conversation in this episode, which is going to be the potential impact of Darius Alexander. Again, the Giants drafted him 65th overall, third-round pick, a player who easily could have gone in the second round. I think that's important to remind everybody. Leading up to the draft, we talked about Alexander as a potential target for the Giants with the number 34 overall pick, which was the second pick of the second round. Of course, they didn't make that pick. They traded that pick, moved up to take Jackson Dart, and we're all happy about that. And then Darius Alexander, who they likely could have taken at 34, fell into their lap at number 65, which is one of the many reasons why we praise Joe Shane so much for such a strong draft class. But Darius Alexander, let's talk about him. What are our expectations for him so far this season, or for this upcoming season, rather? As a rookie, usually you don't expect a player to step in and immediately be a starter. Last year, one of my criticisms of the Giants draft class was the draft class was really strong, but the roster construction forced the entire draft class to start games immediately. It led to injuries and it led to rookie lapses and stuff like that. But the draft class was fantastic last year. I think it'll be the same thing this year, but I don't think there will be as many immediate starters. Cam Scatterby is going to be a player who works his way in and kind of takes split carries with Tracy, I assume. Marcus Bowe, another player who's going to develop behind the scenes first before he eventually hopefully becomes a starter. Thomas Fidone is going to be a backup. Corey Black is going to be a special teams player and a backup. Darius Alexander is a player who, sure, potentially could start this year, but does have to battle for that position. Jackson Dart, of course, we don't expect to play much this season. But let's go back to Darius Alexander and talk about why he could end up playing more than we expect, and that really has a lot to do with how thin the Giants' defensive line is. Now, if you're looking at the Giants' defensive line and who they have in the mix, Darius Alexander is obviously in that mix. But among the rest of the players are a few veterans. Rakeem Nunez-Roches is returning with the New York Giants. This is his, I believe, third season with the team, final year on his rookie contract. You also have Roy Robertson-Harris, who the Giants did sign this past offseason. And you have Jeremiah Ledbetter, another player that the Giants did sign this offseason. So a couple of guys in there who are newcomers, and then Rakeem Nunez-Roches, and then, of course, the rookie in Darius Alexander. Now, with Roy Robertson Harris, that's a player that I think you should keep an eye on as Giants fans because of his connection to the coaching staff. The Giants signed him because when he played in his collegiate career, I believe at UTEP many years ago, he actually was coached by none other than Andre Patterson, who, of course, we know is the Giants' defensive line coach right now. So that connection might potentially give Roy Robertson Harris an edge here as he competes in this defensive line room. Now, on top of him, we do have Jeremy Ledbetter, who honestly was pretty good last year. He's a player that I think is underrated. Not enough people are talking about Jeremiah Ledbetter. And again, that was a really under the radar signing by the New York Giants. Pulling up his stats now, last season with Jacksonville, he played in 15 games, had 38 combined tackles, 8 tackles for loss, which was a career high, and 2 sacks. I really like this signing because this is a player who was undervalued. Giants signed him for a very inexpensive cost, and he's clearly peaking. Like, this is a guy who's gotten better. Entered the NFL in 2017 as a 6th-round draft pick, played with the Lions for a year, then was with Tampa for a couple of years, and then for the last 3 seasons has seen quite a bit of playing time with Jacksonville. Played all 17 games in 23, played 15 of the 17 games in 24, but saw a major uptick in production, 38 combined tackles, a career high by a long shot, and 8 tackles for loss, a career high by a long shot. His previous career high was only 1, and then 2 sacks, also a career high. So I feel like the Giants bought low on a player here who is kind of a late bloomer, getting better year to year, but really started peaking last season. Now they're signing him, and he's potentially even going to play a larger role with the Giants this year. So a really under the radar signing, low risk, pretty high reward with Jeremiah Ledbetter. Now he is 31 years old, so how much more growing does he have to do? It remains to be seen. But again, feel like this was an undervalued player in free agency who was starting to improve last year, and the Giants took advantage and got him at, I believe it's only $4 million per season or something like that. I don't have the exact number pulled up. So a good signing there. So expect Jeremiah Ledbetter to make this team. I think he's a pretty good player, and he's obviously competing in this mix, as I mentioned, alongside Raheem Nunez-Roches, alongside Roy Robertson Harris. And then you also have DJ Davidson, who made a couple plays last year. You have Jordan Riley, who made a couple plays 2 preseasons ago, but kind of disappeared last season. I think he's also one of those players that needs to step up. But let's talk about Darius Alexander. I wanted to give you the scope of the interior defensive line room, mention all of these guys so that you could see there are some interesting players in there, Ledbetter being one of them, Robertson Harris also being a guy who probably sticks with the team, but potentially doesn't. And Elijah Chapman, who we mentioned earlier, who's been active at OTAs, as one of those undrafted guys that the Giants got last year, who has been developing into something. This is a little bit of a competitive room is the point that I'm trying to make here. Darius Alexander could end up being a starter for the New York Giants, but he does have quite a bit of competition. He'll need to be better than Elijah Chapman in pass rushing situations, but he'll need to be a better run defender than Jeremiah Ledbetter in run stopping situations. But also keep in mind, there are 3 starting interior defensive line spots in this defense. The Giants run a 3-4 base defense, which means you have a nose tackle, which is Dexter Lawrence, and then you have 2 interior defensive linemen / defensive ends on either shoulder of him, primarily lining up between the guard and the tackle. That's called the 3 tech. Those 2 positions are going to be manned by a combination of the 2 of the 4 or 5 guys that I just mentioned, whether that's Ledbetter and Robertson Harris, whether that's Alexander and Nunez-Roches, Elijah Chapman. That's where things are wide open. The nose tackle spot is 100% Dexter Lawrence's. Nobody else is taking that. But those 2 other starting interior defensive line spots are up for grabs. And so this is going to be a pretty interesting roster battle to watch throughout OTAs. And of course, once we get to training camp, when the pads do come on and in the preseason, I think is where this is really going to get sorted out. So it's a little bit of an early preview for the preseason in some ways. But again, talking about Darius Alexander specifically, wanted to bring this up as reasons why it could be hard for him to get in the starting lineup. But let me tell you the reasons why he might get into the starting lineup. And it has a lot to do with his collegiate production. This is a guy who got better every single year. If you want to look at PFF grades as kind of a threshold for that take, 2022, 77.5, 2023, 80.6, 2024, jumped his grade all the way up to 90.1, was among the highest graded interior defensive linemen in all of college football. He had a really solid 12.9% pass rush win rate. That's an elite metric for an interior defensive lineman and was ranked among the top in the entire draft class. But he also had an elite 7.9% run stopper rate. The thing that I like about Darius Alexander, he is not good at one aspect of the game and subpar in another. He's good at both. He can stop the run. He can get after the quarterback. He has athleticism, but he also has size. He steps in at a 6'4", 310 pounds, so he can stand in there against all the guards well, he's a rookie, so let me not put too high of expectations out there. He can stand up there against some good guards, and he can make some plays against the run as well because of his size and strength. This is just a player who's got the ability to do it both ways. When we were going through some of these prospects in the pre-draft process, there were some who were better pass rushers than others, and there were some who were better run defenders than others. But in terms of who was the most well-balanced prospect on the interior defensive line, it was Darius Alexander. And it's not like he played nose tackle in college and now he's changing positions. All of his snaps primarily were over the B gap, meaning playing that defensive end 3-4 role, that 3-4 defensive end / interior defensive lineman role. So going from the defense he just played in Toledo to the New York Giants defense should be a rather seamless transition for Darius Alexander. Should be an easy one for him to make. So really like this player, like his ability to get after the quarterback, but also like his ability to stop the run. And last piece of information I'll throw out there for this interior defensive line battle that we're seeing, roster battle, Raheem Nunez-Roches, while he is the experienced starting player that the Giants have who would, if they were playing a game tomorrow, he would be in the starting lineup. He is also the player that the Giants have the most incentive to release because if they release him, they will save $3.6 million in salary cap space. So they have motivation to move on from him and roll with one of these other cheaper or younger players instead. And that could be Darius Alexander's path to becoming a starter from day one. If he outperforms Raheem Nunez-Roches throughout the summer, the Giants could take the cap relief from cutting Roches, and Darius Alexander could be a starting interior defensive lineman for the New York Giants from day one, lending not only his good pass rushing skills from the interior, but also his size, his strength, and run-stopping capabilities. Now, how well will all this translate to the next level remains to be seen. Darius Alexander was an older rookie, considered to be an older rookie. I believe he's 25 years old, and he did play at Toledo. So these are things that you have to mention. But I'll also mention Toledo prospects have been translating in recent years. Quinyon Mitchell coming out of Toledo, the cornerback for the Philadelphia Eagles, was really good as a rookie last season. So I think they run a pretty pro-style defensive scheme, and I think that they do breed some pro-style talent. So I really like Darius Alexander. Again, wanted to jump on here today, give you guys an OTA update and report, but also talk about the trenches because I know those go overlooked, especially during OTAs when we're talking about a non-padded practice and we're talking about these receivers and these safeties and these corners making all these plays. It's so easy to overlook the trenches, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted to go ahead and talk about the trenches for you guys and give you that update and also focus in on how excited I am about Darius Alexander and his potential. So that's pretty much the full report on this episode of Fireside Giants. Once again, guys, thank you so much for all the support that you've shown. Yes, I've been traveling. Yes, Alex has been traveling. Yes, our schedule has been a little bit wild and our content has been a little bit altered as a result. But, once the summer really kicks off for the Giants and the practices at the end of July, expect things to return completely to normal and expect us to just continue to pump out all of the great content that you love and hit the ground running because we're really excited for this season, especially since we've got some quarterbacks that we're excited to watch. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you guys so much. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Ring the bell so you don't miss an episode and comment your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you're listening to Apple or Spotify, make sure to leave us a 5-star review and go ahead and follow us on all of our social media channels at Fireside Giants. Without further ado, I'll catch you on the next one. Have a good one. And let's go New York Giants.
Perfect.